The mysterious message. Captain John Miller sat alone in the cockpit of his starship, staring out at the endless void of space. The war was over, or at least that's what everyone said. The galaxy was slowly rebuilding. But John couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there. Something important, something dangerous. For the past few weeks, he had been assigned to patrol the outer rim of the galaxy, far from any major conflict zones. It was a quiet duty, just what he needed after years of fighting in the Galactic War. He missed the action, but more than that, he missed the feeling of purpose. Every soldier, every officer, had been affected by the war in one way or another. John had seen friends die, planets destroyed, and empires fall. Now, everything felt empty. He sighed deeply and leaned back in his chair. His thoughts wandered to his family. They had been one of the many casualties of the war. His mother, father, and younger sister were lost when their home planet was attacked by the enemy forces. John had never truly gotten over their deaths, but he didn't have time to mourn. He was a soldier, and soldiers didn't have the luxury of grief. At least, that's what he told himself. Just as he was about to close his eyes for a brief moment of rest, the console in front of him beeped. A small blinking message light appeared on the screen. It was odd. John wasn't expecting any messages, especially not out here in the empty reaches of space. He hesitated for a moment before pressing the button to open the message. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the sender's name. It was an encrypted message from a source he didn't recognize. At first glance, it looked like a simple junk message, just random letters and numbers. But there was something about it that caught his attention. The message was specific, personal even. It seemed to be meant for him. John quickly accessed the decryption system, his fingers moving rapidly across the controls. His mind raced. Could it be a prank? Someone playing a cruel joke on him? Or was it something more? He had seen many strange things during the war, but this felt different. The feeling of unease in his stomach grew as the encryption code began to break apart, revealing the message beneath. The message wasn't long. In fact, it was just a few short sentences, but they hit him hard. To Captain John Miller, the last of your bloodline. Your inheritance awaits you. Find the signal on the abandoned station. Trust no one. The past holds the key to the future. John blinked, unsure of what he had just read. His inheritance. What did that even mean? He didn't know of any inheritance left for him. His family had no wealth, no power. They were just ordinary people living ordinary lives on an ordinary planet. Or at least, that's what he had always thought. The more he thought about it, the more confused he became. Could it be a trap? Or was someone truly trying to tell him something important? He glanced over at the map displayed on the control panel. The message mentioned an abandoned station. It didn't say where it was exactly, but there was only one station that matched the description. A long-forgotten outpost on the outer edge of the galaxy, far from any known trade routes. The station had been abandoned years ago, when the war had torn through the region. It was a place few people ever visited, a place where nothing seemed to happen. But why would anyone send him a message leading him there? John ran a hand through his short, dark hair and sighed. There was no way he was just going to ignore this. His curiosity was eating at him, and deep down, he felt like this was the first real lead he had gotten in years. He had spent so much time running from the past, trying to forget, but now it seemed like the past was coming for him. He activated the starship's systems and began plotting a course for the abandoned station. His mind raced with questions. Who had sent the message? Why him? What was waiting for him at the station? Was this some sort of sick joke, or was there something more to this than he could possibly imagine? As the starship powered up, John couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. It was as if the message had unlocked something deep inside him, a feeling he hadn't had in years. It was the feeling of being needed, of being important. It was the feeling of hope, but with that hope came fear. Fear of what he might find at the station. Fear of what the message meant. He leaned back in his seat and stared out at the stars, the darkness of space stretching endlessly before him. The journey ahead would be long, but there was no turning back now. Whatever awaited him at the abandoned station, he knew one thing for sure. It was going to change everything. John's hands gripped the controls tightly, determination settling in. He didn't know what was waiting for him, but he was going to find out. The past had come knocking, and he couldn't ignore it anymore. The mysteries of his family, the war, and this strange message were all pulling him forward. He had no choice but to follow the trail, wherever it might lead. The stars outside seemed to blur as the starship's engines roared to life, propelling him into the unknown. And in that moment, John Miller knew that his life would never be the same again. The secret location. The stars flickered outside John Miller's ship like scattered diamonds, but none of them seemed to offer any comfort now. His ship hummed steadily through the empty blackness of space, heading toward the coordinates that had been hidden in the mysterious message. The abandoned station, a place few had ever dared to visit since the war had torn it apart, awaited him. As the ship neared the station's location, a sense of unease crept up on John. The message had been clear enough. Find the signal on the abandoned station. But what signal? What exactly was he supposed to be looking for? And why did his family's name seem to be at the heart of it all? He gripped the control panel tighter, trying to push away the questions, but they lingered like shadows in the back of his mind. The station loomed in front of him suddenly, emerging from the dark void of space. It was a hulking, abandoned structure, broken and battered from years of neglect. It floated like a ghost, silent and still. The station had once been a thriving outpost, a hub of activity and trade before it had been deserted when the war had ravaged the galaxy. Now, it was little more than a shell, a forgotten relic of a time long past. John maneuvered his starship closer, eyes fixed on the damaged station. Its outer walls were cracked, and debris floated around it, remnants of the destruction it had suffered. His ship's sensors picked up signs of life. A faint pulse, a flicker of energy, but nothing more. No crew, no ships, just silence. He hovered just outside the docking bay, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of the message pressing on him, like a hidden hand guiding him toward something unknown. "Here goes nothing," John muttered under his breath. With a deep breath, he powered down his ship's engines and prepared for the next step. He opened the hatch, stepping into the dimly lit hallway of the abandoned station. The air smelled stale, and the silence was deafening. The walls of the station were scarred from years of battle and neglect. There was no sign of life, but the faint pulse from earlier still echoed in the back of his mind. It was faint, almost as if someone, or something, was trying to reach out to him. The message had said to trust no one. And yet, here he was, all alone, with nothing but his instincts to guide him. The eerie atmosphere made every footstep feel louder than it should. He took a deep breath, pulling out a small flashlight to cut through the darkness. As he moved through the hallways, he found evidence of the station's former use: empty storage rooms, scattered equipment, and old military insignia. At the end of the long corridor, he found a door that seemed different from the rest. Unlike the others, it wasn't sealed with time or damage. No, this door looked intentionally locked, as though someone had gone to great lengths to keep it closed. The faint energy pulse was stronger here. His heart raced. He wasn't sure what he was about to find, but his gut told him that this was what he had been looking for. John approached the door slowly, scanning it with his flashlight. The walls around it were strangely untouched, as if they had been maintained long after the rest of the station had been abandoned. He reached out and touched the door panel, pressing a series of buttons he knew had been deactivated long ago. To his surprise, the door responded, its lights flickering, a hum vibrating through the air. With a soft whir, the door slid open, revealing the hidden chamber beyond. The air inside was cooler, almost frigid. He stepped forward, his boots making no sound on the smooth floor as he moved deeper into the room. The room was empty at first glance, but then his flashlight swept over a single large console in the center. It looked old, but functional. A series of blinking lights indicated something important was happening here. John approached the console cautiously, his breath steady, but his heart pounding in his chest. The pulse of energy was much stronger now, almost as if it were alive. As he reached the console, he noticed something strange, a symbol. It was the same symbol that had been on the vault in his family's estate, the one he had seen only once in his life, years ago. The same symbol, the same mystery. He didn't have time to think about it. The console was active now, the screen lighting up with a series of coordinates and a message. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give him the next clue. The next phase awaits you at the northern outpost. You will find what you seek there. But be warned, not all truths are meant to be known. John's heart skipped a beat. The northern outpost. He had heard rumors of a secret research facility located there, hidden from most eyes. But he had never been there, nor did he know who could have left this information for him. As the console flickered off, John stood still, trying to process everything he had just read. His family's legacy, the mysterious message, the alien-looking symbol, and now this next location. What did it all mean? Suddenly, he heard a noise behind him. A quiet shuffle, like footsteps in the distance. His pulse quickened. Was someone else on the station? Or was it something worse? John turned sharply, reaching for his sidearm, but the room was empty. He swallowed hard and turned back to the console, unsure of what to do next. The station felt more like a trap now. His instincts told him to leave, but the message, the coordinates, everything in him screamed to go forward. The quiet hum of the abandoned station felt colder now, as though it were alive, watching him. He had to make a choice, follow the trail of the message, or turn back and pretend none of this had ever happened. The pulse of energy was still there, faint but insistent. John Miller took a deep breath. The only thing he knew for sure was that he couldn't stop now. Whatever this was, it was bigger than him, bigger than anything he had ever faced. He had to find the truth. The alien's story. John Miller couldn't shake the cold feeling that had settled in his chest as he stood in the center of the abandoned station. The console had given him a new set of coordinates, leading him to the northern outpost, but there was something else in the air now. A shift, something he couldn't explain. The station, once a forgotten relic, felt like it was awake, alive, and watching him. He hadn't even realized it, but he had been standing there for hours, his mind racing through the possibilities of what could be happening. The walls, the darkness, the strange pulse of energy. It was all leading him to something bigger. But it wasn't until he heard the faint sound of footsteps, barely audible against the eerie silence, that he knew the station wasn't as empty as he had thought. At first he thought it might just be his imagination, but then he heard it again. A soft shuffle, like someone moving cautiously through the hallways. His hand instinctively went to the sidearm at his belt, but the fear inside him was different now. This wasn't the fear of an enemy soldier or a war zone. This was something far deeper, more unsettling. Someone or something had been here with him all along, hiding in the shadows. John slowly turned toward the door, his mind racing. Could it be the same person who had sent the message? Or perhaps someone who had been on this station all this time? The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside the door. His breath caught in his throat. The door to the chamber creaked open, revealing a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman, tall and slender, with skin that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Her eyes glowed with an eerie green hue, and her features were unlike anything John had ever seen before. She wasn't human. She couldn't be. Her appearance was both beautiful and unsettling, as if she didn't belong in this world at all. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. John's hand tightened around his weapon, but he didn't make a move. He couldn't. He was frozen, trying to make sense of what stood before him. "I know what you're thinking," she said, her voice low and melodic. yet filled with a strange sadness. Her accent was unlike any he had ever heard before, but her words were clear. "You don't trust me. You shouldn't." John's mind raced. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but they all seemed to stick in his throat. He tried to speak, but his voice felt too weak to form words. The woman stepped into the room, moving with a grace that seemed unnatural, like she was gliding rather than walking. "I'm not here to hurt you, Captain Miller. I am here because you need to know the truth." John's eyes widened. How did she know his name? How did she know he was a captain? "I am not of your world," she continued. "I am of a species called the Varesh. We were once the rulers of this galaxy, before the war, before everything changed." John's heart skipped a beat. Varesh. The name was unfamiliar, but something about it stirred a faint memory. The alien woman. She had to be connected to the message, to the inheritance the message spoke of. She stepped closer, her glowing eyes fixed on him. "I have been enslaved for many years. The galaxy you know is nothing like it once was. And your family, Captain Miller, your bloodline, was not just human. Your ancestors were involved in something much darker. The inheritance you seek is not wealth or power. It is something far more dangerous." John felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't understand. His family had been ordinary. His father had been a soldier, his mother a teacher, his sister just a child when the war took them all. They had been no one, or so he had thought. The words she spoke didn't make sense. The woman paused, her expression softening for the first time. "I understand your confusion. I was once the property of your family, a gift given to them by the old empire. But when the empire fell, I was abandoned, forgotten, left to survive on my own in the ruins. I was the last of my kind, left to perish alone, until the message was sent to you." John shook his head, his thoughts tumbling over each other. "My family. They had nothing to do with this. They were just ordinary people. They weren't part of any empire. They were." "Not ordinary," she interrupted gently. "You think they were ordinary, but you were always meant for something more. Your bloodline carries the legacy of a war that predates the one you fought in. The truth about your family has been hidden for generations." John's mind was spinning. Everything he thought he knew was crumbling around him. He had joined the war as a soldier to fight for his family, to honor them after their deaths. But now, standing in front of this alien woman, he realized that there were things about his family he could never have imagined. She reached out slowly, touching the side of his face with a cool, delicate hand. "I will show you the truth. But know this, Captain. Some truths come with a cost. Are you ready to learn what your family was truly part of? Are you ready to see the galaxy for what it really is?" John's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, the weight of her words seemed to crush him. But something else stirred inside him, something deep, curiosity, the need to understand, the need to know. He nodded slowly, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts inside him. "I'm ready." And with that, the alien woman began to reveal the truth about the galaxy, about the war, and about a secret legacy that would change John's life forever. A dangerous alliance. The truth hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and foreboding. John Miller's mind was reeling, trying to process everything the alien woman had just revealed. His family wasn't just an ordinary family. They had been connected to something far larger, far darker. His bloodline had a history intertwined with the very fabric of the galaxy's power struggles, and now, standing on the edge of a forgotten station in the depths of space, he was learning that the past could never be left behind. The alien woman, who had introduced herself as Iris, stood in front of him, her glowing eyes fixed on his face, as if waiting for him to say something. John could still feel the weight of her touch from when she had placed her hand on his cheek, her skin cool but comforting. "We don't have time to waste, Captain," Iris said, her voice calm but urgent. "The Empire is still out there. They've been waiting for this moment, and they know you're here." John didn't need any more explanation. The way she spoke, the look in her eyes, it was clear that the stakes were higher than he could have imagined. He had thought he was just some soldier, caught up in a war he didn't fully understand. But now, he was beginning to realize that he was part of something much bigger, something that could change the fate of the entire galaxy. "How do you know all of this?" John asked, his voice rough, still trying to make sense of it all. "How do you know about my family, about me?" Zyrus didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked past him, toward the darkened corridor leading deeper into the station. "I was not always a slave. Once, I was one of the Empire's highest-ranking officers, a leader in a war that spanned galaxies. I knew your ancestors well. They were part of a faction that once controlled powerful technology that the Empire still wants. And now, they've sent their agents to track down that power." John's mind snapped to attention. "The technology, is that what they want me for?" Zyrus nodded, her expression growing darker. "Yes, the power your family left behind is locked away, hidden in places that only a few knew about, places like the one we're standing in now. You're the key to unlocking it." John's heart pounded in his chest. It was as if everything he had known, everything he had fought for, had just been turned upside down. The war had ended, but the real battle, the battle for power, was only just beginning. As if on cue, the station's lights flickered, and a strange hum filled the air. The pulse he had felt earlier, the one that had drawn him here, was growing stronger. Something was wrong. A deep, gnawing sense of dread washed over him. He wasn't alone anymore. "Get to the ship," Zyrus urged, her voice sharp now. "They found us." John didn't ask any more questions. His training kicked in. He turned toward the docking bay, moving quickly but cautiously. As they made their way down the hall, Zyrus was a step behind him, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. She was on edge, and so was he. He could feel it. Something was coming. As they reached the docking bay, a sudden explosion rattled the walls, sending debris flying. The station shook violently, and John stumbled, barely keeping his footing. Zyrus caught him by the arm, pulling him toward the ship. "They're here," she whispered, her voice laced with fear. "You don't understand. The Empire's agents are not just soldiers. They have something far worse than that. Creatures that can track down anyone, no matter how far they run." John's pulse raced as he heard the sounds of boots pounding down the corridor. There was no time. He knew they had to leave, but the fear in Zyrus's voice made him hesitate. The last thing he wanted was to end up in the clutches of whatever these Empire agents were. Before he could take another step, a shadow moved in front of them, blocking their path. From the darkness emerged a figure, tall and cloaked in black armor, his face hidden behind a mask. John's instincts kicked in. This was no ordinary soldier. There was something otherworldly about him, something that made his skin crawl. "You're too late," the figure said, his voice cold, mechanical. "The girl has already betrayed you, Captain Miller. She has no place in your world anymore." Zyrus stepped forward, her hand raised. "Don't listen to him. He's one of them, the Empire's puppets." John's mind was spinning. Betrayal. The truth. His bloodline. It all felt like too much to handle in such a short amount of time. But one thing was clear. The Empire's reach was far greater than he had ever imagined. "We don't have time for this," Zyrus said, grabbing John's arm and pulling him toward the ship. "We need to leave. Now." The figure in the black armor didn't move, his gaze fixed on Zyrus, his expression unreadable. Then, with a flick of his wrist, a blade materialized from his gauntlet, humming with an unnatural energy. Zyrus stepped in front of John, her eyes filled with determination. "I'll hold him off. You get to the ship. They'll come after us, but we can't stay here any longer." John opened his mouth to protest, but she shook her head, her voice low and urgent. "There's no choice. Trust me, Captain. You'll need to fight for more than just your life from here on out. Now go." For a moment, John hesitated. torn between leaving her behind and running for his life. But then he realized, this was it. The Empire was coming for them. And they weren't going to stop until they had everything. The future of the galaxy, his family's legacy, and his own survival all depended on him taking the next step. Without another word, John turned and sprinted toward the ship, the heavy thud of combat echoing behind him. He didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. Cyrus's fate was now tied to his, whether he liked it or not. And as the door to his ship sealed behind him, he realized this was more than just a fight for survival. This was a fight for everything. The truth, the power, and the future of the galaxy were at stake. And the war was far from over. The hidden enemy. The cold metal of the ship's controls under John Miller's hands felt like the only thing anchoring him to reality. The roar of the engines was the only sound as the ship blasted away from the abandoned station, the flickering lights of the galaxy fading behind him. Xeris stood silently beside him, her eyes still locked on the dark expanse of space outside, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. She knew more than she had let on. About the Empire, about the galaxy, about his family. And John was starting to realize that there were still many layers to peel back. John's breath was steady, but his heart raced. He couldn't shake the image of the mysterious soldier, clad in black, cold, and merciless. The way he had spoken about Xeris, about her betrayal, had struck something deep inside him. Was she hiding something from him? And more importantly, why had the Empire sent such a force after them? It couldn't just be about him being the heir to some long-lost power. There was something more, something bigger. As they made their way through hyperspace, the ship's communication system suddenly flickered to life. A soft beep echoed in the cockpit. Incoming transmission, the ship's computer announced, its voice cool and automated. John glanced over at Cyrus. Her posture stiffened, her eyes narrowing as if she had been expecting this. Without a word, she walked over to the comm station, pressing a button to accept the transmission. The screen flickered for a moment, and then a face appeared. It was an older man, his features sharp and lined with age. His eyes were cold, calculating, like someone who had seen too many wars and had lost any trace of innocence long ago. His military uniform, marked with insignia John didn't recognize, was adorned with symbols of authority. "Captain Miller," the man said, his voice low and commanding, but with a hint of amusement. "I must admit, I didn't think you'd make it this far. But I suppose blood is thicker than anything, isn't it?" John's pulse quickened. The man's eyes locked onto his with an unsettling familiarity, but John couldn't place where he had seen him before. The name, the face, none of it made sense. "I don't know who you are," John said, his voice tense. "And I don't care. What I care about is getting out of here alive. So unless you want to talk terms, I suggest you—" "I know who you are, Captain," the man interrupted with a cruel smile. "I know exactly who you are, the last of the Miller bloodline. You think you're just a soldier, don't you? A man who happened to inherit some meaningless title. But your family was always more than that. Always." John's grip tightened on the control panel. "What do you want with me?" The man's expression turned serious, almost sorrowful. "What I want is simple. I want the legacy your family left behind. And I know you're the key to unlocking it. You've always been the key, even when you didn't know it, just like your ancestors, Captain. But what I want, I'm afraid, isn't going to come easily. The galaxy's balance rests in your hands." John's mind spun with questions, but Xeris spoke before he could say anything more. "You're the one behind this," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "You've been tracking us all along, haven't you? You're the one pulling the strings, orchestrating everything." The man's eyes flicked to her, and his smile widened. "Ah, Xeris, you haven't changed a bit. You're still as sharp as ever. Yes, I've been tracking you, Captain. And no, I haven't forgotten about you, Xeris. You were always a useful tool, a pawn in the grand scheme of things. But you were never meant to be more than that." John's breath caught in his throat. The words, the implications, they were too much. Was she not just a victim of the Empire, as she had made it seem? Or was she somehow part of this twisted game the man was talking about? Zyrus stepped forward, her expression a mix of anger and something else. Something darker. You think you can control this, don't you? You think you can take what you want and walk away unscathed. But you're wrong. I won't let you destroy everything. The man chuckled darkly, his hands folding in front of him. Destroy. Oh, Zyrus. You still don't understand, do you? You and the captain are walking into the trap of your lives. The past is long dead. And the Empire, it's not what you think. We are the Empire now. John stood frozen, his mind struggling to keep up with the flood of information. What was this man talking about? What did he mean by the Empire? And what role did John's family truly play in all of this? Before he could process any more, the man leaned closer to the screen, his expression hardening. The real enemy isn't the Empire, you know. The real enemy has been hiding in plain sight, Captain. You've been fighting the wrong battles. It's time you understood the truth. It's time for you to face your true enemy. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving John and Zyrus staring at the blank screen in stunned silence. Zyrus turned to him, her face unreadable. They've known about you from the start. They know who you are, Captain. And they're not the only ones. John could feel the tension building between them. The truth was becoming clearer, but it was only raising more questions. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a pawn in a much larger game. And now his enemy had revealed itself, not as a distant empire, but something far closer, far more dangerous. Zyrus moved to the control panel, her voice steady but laced with urgency. We need to get to the northern outpost now. We've wasted too much time. John nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. The hidden enemy, the man behind the transmission, and the cryptic message. It was all connected. But to what end? As the ship shot forward through the darkness of space, one thing became painfully clear. No one was who they seemed to be. And the true war was just beginning. The battle for the future. The northern outpost loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette against the backdrop of a dying star. John Miller's hands tightened on the controls as his ship entered the outer atmosphere, his mind still reeling from the cryptic conversation with the man who claimed to be the true face of the Empire. The unknown enemy had made one thing clear. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something far greater. And the pieces of this galaxy-spanning puzzle were slowly falling into place, revealing a truth far darker than anything John could have imagined. Beside him, Zyrus was unusually quiet. Her gaze was fixed on the screens in front of her, but John could see the tension in the rigid set of her shoulders. She had always been an enigma. But now, after everything that had been revealed, he couldn't help but wonder how much more she was hiding from him. Was she truly his ally, or was she another pawn in a game that spanned generations? Zyrus glanced over at him, her face hard, eyes filled with determination. We can't let them reach the outpost first, Captain. If they find it before we do, everything will be lost. John nodded, trying to focus on the task ahead. His mind was clouded with the implications of their mission, but the pressing urgency in Zyrus's voice pulled him back to the present. He couldn't afford to lose focus now, not when the fate of the galaxy, of his bloodline, was at stake. As the ship entered the final approach, the sensors began to pick up multiple signatures. Enemy ships, dozens of them, emerging from the shadows of the dying star, their dark forms almost invisible against the blackness of space. The Empire's agents had arrived. And they weren't just here to find the outpost. They were here to make sure no one else could ever uncover its secrets. We've got company, John muttered, his fingers flying over the controls as he activated the ship's defense systems. Zyrus' expression remained unreadable, but her voice was firm. They'll do whatever it takes to keep us from the truth. We can't let them stop us now. The ships from the Empire were fast, agile, faster than John had anticipated. Their weapons fired first, lances of energy slicing through the darkness and striking the shields of John's ship. The force of the hit made the ship shudder violently, but the shields held strong for now. However, John knew they couldn't take many more hits like that. He twisted the controls, sending the ship into a sharp, evasive maneuver. The stars outside became streaks of light as the ship hurtled through the chaos, narrowly avoiding incoming fire. The enemy ships followed closely, their fire never relenting. But John's training kicked in, keeping them just out of reach. Xeris moved to the weapons console without a word, her movements swift, purposeful. "I'll cover us. Keep them off our tail." The ship's weapon systems hummed to life, and a series of bright blasts erupted from the ship's turrets, lighting up the blackness of space. The enemy ships tried to dodge, but the accuracy of Xeris's shots was unrelenting. One by one, the attacking ships began to explode in brilliant bursts of light, disintegrating into fiery debris. John's heart raced, but his eyes never left the target, the northern outpost, now clearly visible ahead. The closer they got, the more he could feel the weight of everything on his shoulders. The outpost held answers, yes, but it also held dangers. The more he uncovered, the more he understood just how much was hidden beneath the surface of his family's legacy. The Empire wasn't just a political entity. It was an intricate web of manipulation, of control, with its tendrils stretching across every corner of the galaxy, and he had just scratched the surface. The enemy wasn't done yet. As they approached the outpost's landing platform, a massive dreadnought appeared from behind the asteroid belt, blocking their path. Its size was immense, its guns poised to fire, its shields stronger than any ship John had ever faced. "Brace yourself," Xeris said, her voice low, filled with a quiet intensity. John's mind raced, but he didn't hesitate. He swung the ship into a sharp dive, narrowly avoiding the barrage of laser fire that lit up the space around them. The dreadnought followed them, relentless. The fight for the future wasn't just about survival. It was about fighting back against a force that had ruled the galaxy for centuries. "We need to land. Now," John shouted. "Get ready to jump. This isn't going to be easy." The dreadnought loomed closer, its guns charging for another devastating blast. It would take everything they had to get past it. But John knew that if they didn't land on the outpost's surface soon, the chance to uncover the truth would slip through their fingers. As the ship descended toward the outpost's surface, the ground below began to rumble. The base's defenses powered up, its weaponry coming online just in time to meet the dreadnought's assault. A barrage of missiles shot from the surface, striking the massive warship. For a moment, it seemed like the two forces were locked in an unholy battle, the sky torn apart by energy blasts and explosions. But John's focus was razor-sharp. He veered the ship closer, squeezing every ounce of speed out of the engines. The dreadnought would have to make way, or it would be destroyed. And then, with a final blast from the outpost's defenses, the dreadnought veered off course. Its engines disabled, leaving John and Xeris a narrow window of escape. They were almost there. As the ship touched down on the outpost's landing pad, John's heart pounded in his chest. The battle wasn't over. This was only the beginning. But they had made it. They had breached the outer defenses of the Empire. And now, the true fight would begin. The final decision. The air inside the northern outpost was cold, thick with the metallic scent of aged technology and the distant hum of machinery. John Miller stepped cautiously onto the surface, his boots echoing in the eerie silence. The battle in space felt like a distant memory now, the roar of the engines and the flash of weapons replaced by a heavy stillness that weighed down on him. Xeris was beside him, her face as unreadable as ever, but there was something different in the way she carried herself. The urgency had shifted to something darker, something resigned. John couldn't help but feel that they were about to face something far beyond just the remnants of the Empire. This place, this forgotten outpost, wasn't just a base. It was the key to everything. The answers to all the questions he had been carrying since that strange message had first appeared. He glanced over at her. "What's here, Xeris? What are we really after?" Her eyes met his for the first time since they'd landed, and for a moment they locked in silence. Then she spoke, her voice low and heavy with meaning. "This is where it all began. The heart of the Empire's true power. The truth about your family. About the legacy you've inherited. And the choices you'll have to make." John's heart beat harder in his chest, the weight of her words sinking in. He had expected answers, but this was something far greater. The northern outpost wasn't just a hidden base. It was the epicenter of a conflict that spanned centuries, a place where the old Empire's darkest secrets were buried, where the future of the galaxy would be decided. As they moved deeper into the facility, the halls felt even colder, the walls adorned with strange alien symbols and technology he didn't recognize. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the silence became, until it felt like they were walking through a tomb. But the only thing dead here was the Empire's reign. The darkness of the past still lingered, waiting for someone to awaken it. Ahead, a large door stood at the end of the hall, sealed shut by what appeared to be an ancient locking mechanism. Xeris stopped, her eyes narrowing as she examined the door. John's pulse quickened as he realized this was it, the place they had been seeking, the place where it all came together. "This is where your family's legacy was hidden," Xeris said, her voice steady. "Behind this door lies the power they wanted to control, the technology that could change everything, the power to reshape the galaxy. But you need to understand, Captain, it's not just a weapon. It's a choice." John didn't respond. He wasn't sure what to say. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of what he had learned. The message, the inheritance, the Empire's relentless pursuit. Everything pointed to this moment. But what was the truth? What was the choice he had to make? Xeris stepped forward and, with a swift motion, activated the ancient mechanism. The door groaned, its massive metal panels sliding open to reveal a chamber unlike anything John had ever seen. The walls were lined with strange, glowing glyphs, and at the center stood a massive machine, a massive, intricate structure of alien design, pulsing with energy. The chamber hummed with power, but it wasn't just the machine that caught John's attention. Behind it, mounted on the wall, was a large screen, flickering to life with a series of cryptic symbols. The words were alien, but John could understand them. Somehow, it felt like he always had. The truth was here. The legacy was here. Xeris stood still, her gaze fixed on the screen. "This is what the Empire wanted. This is why they came for you, why they tracked you down. You're the only one who can activate it." John felt a rush of fear and uncertainty. "Activate it? What does it do?" Xeris turned to him, her expression softening for the first time since they had arrived. "This machine doesn't just hold power. It holds the potential to alter reality itself. It was created by your ancestors, not as a weapon, but as a way to control the flow of time, the fabric of the galaxy itself. They called it the Nexus. And now, it's yours." The word Nexus rang in his mind like a bell. He had heard it before, in the stories his family had passed down, though they were always told as legends, tales of a lost empire and a power greater than any that had ever existed. But this was real. The Nexus was real. John took a step toward the machine, the pull of it irresistible. He could feel the power radiating from it, ancient and vast. But at the same time, a creeping sense of dread settled in his chest. This power, whatever it was, wasn't meant for just anyone. It wasn't just about control. It was about something far deeper. And he had a feeling that whatever decision he made here would ripple across the galaxy. Xeris's voice broke through his thoughts. "You have two choices, Captain. You can activate the Nexus and take control of this power. You can reshape the galaxy, remake it in your image. Or you can destroy it and ensure that no one, Not even the Empire will ever be able to use it again. John's breath caught in his throat. The weight of the decision was crushing. In that moment, everything felt like it had led to this choice. The galaxy, his family's legacy, his future, it was all here, in this room. And now, it was up to him to decide what would happen next. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they hovered just above the control panel. A voice whispered in his mind, echoing the words Xerus had spoken. The power to reshape the galaxy, or the power to destroy it. John closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like 1,000 stars. The galaxy had suffered enough. His family had suffered enough. The war, the empire, the endless cycles of destruction, it had to end. He made his choice. With a final, steadying breath, John Miller activated the Nexus.